Welcome back to the Mandarin Blueprint podcast. Today, I have on the line Ryan Smith, who has been a major contributor to the Mandarin Blueprint method since it came out, I'm pretty sure. And so we're really happy to have him on today to talk a little bit about his experiences in the Mandarin Blueprint method. But before we get into that, Ryan, welcome. And maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Ryan Smith. I'm a 30-ish-year-old programmer who lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. So kind of your stereotypical Silicon Valley programmer.
Yeah.
However, I have a huge interest in languages. I have both a bachelor's and a master's in linguistics and have studied like a dozen languages. I'm only conversationally fluent in Spanish, but I can get by in Russian, French, German, Finnish, and can read a handful of others on top of that.
Well, that's awesome. So the linguistics side of things, that's really interesting because, from a linguistic standpoint, I've never specifically studied linguistics, but when I was studying Chinese in university, there was a lot of things that we were doing that were, I guess, based in linguistics. So this is sort of a tangent of a question, but I'm just curious what you think about this. What things have you found when you're looking at the different languages that are kind of, I guess, common across all languages? It's like, in the one sense, all languages have so many differences, but in another sense, there's some similarities because otherwise we wouldn't know their languages, So I'm curious what your thoughts are about that, having looked at, Finnish, Russian, German, and Chinese, now Spanish. What are your thoughts about that?
I guess the most important thing that I learned, and this is going to sound incredibly obvious when I say it out loud, is all languages accomplish the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Every single language, the point is communication. And it's important to remember for me that while every language will express a concept completely differently sometimes or incredibly similarly if they're related, they all can express and do express the exact same thing.
Right.
So when you get into sociolinguistics, you get into the point of, yes, I could say that, but I never would say that. Like, saying, I love you or something like that, like just, like romance thing. You don't do that in Finnish. There's other ways to say, like, I really appreciate you, but the culture just is not set up that way. They're very closed, very personalized.
That's interesting.
Culture. So
yeah, sure. Yeah, like Chinese parents don't tend to say to their kids, I love you very much, which sounds so cold when you first hear about it. But then you realize they're sacrificing so much for their kids that it's like the way they see it is they're like, well, I mean, what's saying it? Why does that matter? I do it, And so it's kind of like, and if you ask them, they're like, of course I love my kids, but it's a cultural thing that it's like, you don't need to say it all the time. Whereas, as an American, I come back here and it's like, you see any parent with their kids and they're like, okay, please don't do that. I love you very much, So it's kind of funny. But those cultural differences are probably one of the most interesting actual, tangible differences between the languages, in the sense that, of course, there's a way to say the code of that meaning that comes out in Finnish, but whether or not you'd actually say it is a different issue. So yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah. So you've learned these different languages, or at least, started on learning some different languages. So what inspired you to want to go into Chinese?
So it's been kind of an interesting journey on that one. I first started studying Chinese 4 years ago. And kind of the main reason for that one, there's kind of two reasons. One is I live in San Francisco area. I don't live in San Francisco itself, but it's like 30 miles north of me. And there are 4 huge language populations here. We have English, obviously, because we are in the US, but we also have Spanish, Mandarin Chinese, and Cantonese. The number of speakers of each of those languages is kind of like mind-blowingly large. And you can find communities like 1-2 miles from my house where there's a Chinese village, basically. Everyone who lives there is Cantonese, unfortunately, because I'm learning Mandarin, but Cantonese speaking, and you go to the restaurant and there's barely any English available. The menu is in Chinese, things like that. So I'd learned Spanish, and so it's like I kind of want to learn one of the other languages of the community. and Mandarin had a lot more resources than Cantonese.
Yeah, yeah.
That
And I
was the
mean,
reason at the 4
yeah, go
years
ahead.
ago.
Yeah,
But it's kind of shifted. Like that was kind of a loose motivation. However, my daughter is 1.5 years old now, and one of the things I really wanted for her when we were picking a daycare was a bilingual daycare, so she could get a lot of exposure.
nice.
And I was kind of imagining that was going to be a Spanish English one. But it turns out 4 blocks from our apartment was a trilingual school, which was Japanese, Mandarin, and English, which was phenomenal. So she's going to that, mostly learning Chinese, but also speaks some Japanese now. So I'm trying to speak Chinese with her at home, being able to speak Chinese with her teachers and her classmates. And so that's been kind of pushing me more lately.
Yeah, wow. What an awesome goal. That's like, because we've had, it's whatever gives you fuel, right? So it's like, because there's
Yeah.
no avoiding, what I've always said about Mandarin Blueprint is that imagine you're climbing a mountain. If you climb the mountain and don't make any wrong turns and have a very clear compass and all the right things you need to get up the mountain, you will get up the mountain faster than someone who doesn't, but it's still climbing a mountain. Like you still have to put the time in.
Mhm.
And so you still have to have some motivation. You have to feel like if I get to the top of this mountain, what am I going to do? Well, there's communication with my daughter, her teachers, her ability to, and like giving her the ability to have more opportunities in life because she'll be able to communicate with this huge population of people. Talk about
Yeah.
motivation. I mean, that's great. Nothing's more motivating, I think, than doing something for your children. So that's fantastic.
I mean, on top of that, I've also just very recently started doing business with a company that's located in Hong Kong and speaks a lot of Mandarin,
Oh,
so I can kind of listen in across the negotiation business tables.
yeah, that's great. That's great. And a lot of people who
It's been
speak
great.
Cantonese can also speak Mandarin. Even in Hong Kong, it's slowly. I mean, it makes sense because Hong Kong is now
Yeah,
a part of China. It's slowly becoming that the second language is more Mandarin and less English. I mean, you can still totally speak English in Hong Kong, but it's just sort of a tangent side note. I've been to Hong Kong several times now, and you'd think that speaking English is like no problem at all, but it's not exactly true. You'd do better if you knew Cantonese there. It's like you kind of
yeah,
get by in Hong Kong if you know English, but you would really thrive if you knew Cantonese. And I mean, Mandarin is, well, they're transitioning into using more Mandarin, but at least you understand the written language when you're there. So okay,
yeah.
all right. So assuming you continue and keep finding success with Chinese, what's your you know what will it mean for your life apart from obviously it'll help your daughter, but is there anything you plan to do with it? Like okay, I can speak Chinese fluently now. I plan to do what?
So I guess twofold goals. I'm going to split one into like just for personal goal.
Hmm.
Um, for reading fluency with characters, I have a copy of the Chronicles of Narnia, the entire series in Chinese in paper form, and I want to read that book.
Awesome.
I love that book series. It's kind of like a foundational book when I was a kid. I've read it in English, I've read it in Spanish, I've read it in Russian. I want to read it in Chinese without any assistance.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
for those in the video, this is the Chinese version of Harry Potter, which I read first, and then I read Game of Thrones, which was significantly more challenging. But I tell you, that was seriously like one of the most gratifying things to do because especially because you like the content. I assume you read Chronicles of
yeah,
Narnia already, right? So yeah, so you'll
yeah.
be able to understand it at an earlier phase than what's called the extensive reading moment, which you might be familiar
Yeah.
with. 98% comprehension. Now that's ideal if you're looking at something you have no context for. So like if you just pick up a newspaper article, you'd want it to be at that 98% understanding level. But if it was something that you already know. I mean, Stephen Krashen, or maybe it was Steve Kaufman, one of those guys was talking about how when they're reading, I think it was Krashen, when he's reading Star Trek in Russian, he was fine with 60% comprehension because
Yeah.
he just loves the content so much. So great personal goal there. So yeah, and you said you had a second goal?
The second goal would just be able to like freely converse with my daughter's teachers.
Great. Yeah. Do you have any plans to go to China?
So my wife has zero interest in going to China, but I'm hoping when my daughter is a little older and both of us are more fluent, that she and I at least can go on a family vacation. And hopefully my wife will be convinced if two of the three want to go and can get around easily.
That's so funny. Sydney said the same thing the other day in the case study we did with him. Yeah, it's really, Chengdu and Sichuan are a really lovely area to go to. And so is the province just south of that, Yunnan, which is just beautiful. It's like, it's kind of similar type of topography and climate to northern Vietnam. So it's
Hmm.
it's really nice there all around. And obviously you go to Beijing or Shanghai or something and they're cool, but like they're kind of the most Western. Beijing has a lot of the history. So, you can see a lot of really cool history in Beijing. But like, I would say that if you want to see some real pure China and some of the friendliest people, Sichuan and Yunnan is like one of the best places to go. So, but yeah, and I'm sure that will maybe show your wife some pictures of like Western Sichuan, and I think you might change your mind. It's really nice. So cool. All right. So that's awesome. Great goals there. So now I wanted to kind of transition into some questions that are a little bit more specific to the Mandarin Blueprint method. So one of the things that we're always really interested in is how quickly you can start to learn a character. So, at the beginning you learn the mnemonic system, and that takes some time.
Hmm.
It's nobody can just learn a new method for learning and just immediately. You got it pretty quickly, but I remember being like, "Wow, Ryan gets it." But so after you feel, so this question is kind of twofold. So the one is now, how quickly can you learn a character on average? And two, how long did it take you to get to that point? So, how many characters did you need to learn before you're like, okay, I totally get how this works now. So I can quickly just boom, 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 go through and learn a character.
So at the moment, I'd say learning the character is like 2 to 5 minutes, depending on the complexity of the character.
Hmm. Yeah, gotcha. Okay. And so at the beginning, how long did it take before you felt like you understood? Like, how many characters did you go through before you felt like you understood how the method works?
So I guess there's kind of I understood the method probably by like character 15. It's an incredibly makes sense like how it works. The ability to actually do it on my own probably didn't come until like 5 characters after you guys stopped holding us through the videos. So like 105 or something like that is when you guys stopped giving example stories for every single character, and then it's all of
Right.
a sudden like, oh, I have to do this from scratch.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it's like
I'll
five
see
more characters. We're like, okay, I'm comfortable with this.
that. My first reaction to that was like, oh, maybe we should do some more videos. But then I thought, wait, no, no. What it was just that you had to figure it out on your own. And there's some degree
Yeah,
of that with education. Like once you kind of take the training wheels off, you sort of,
yeah.
oh, okay, I got you. So that's good to know.
It,
All right, cool. Yeah. So that's
Something you guys actually might consider doing is dropping a few of the videos you already created. So, like, you have full videos for the first 105 completely handled us and then completely just throw us in the deep end to see if we can swim.
yeah.
You might like drop a few, just be like, okay, for the next 2 characters, you're going to do them on your own. And then
Mhm.
you're going to go back so you can, here's a little more hand holding.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I think that we learned out of a book originally, and so it was completely on our own from the beginning. So to some degree, we were like, all right, well, this is like we're getting to the point where they totally understand. And then but one of the things we are doing, I'm actually in the process of writing some of this stuff, is at the end of each level beyond level 12, giving a more comprehensive review and a little bit of a motivational video, talk a bit more about that particular unit, which is something we've kind of always had on the back burner since we released the course. But we're going to do that, and
Yeah.
maybe pick a few characters every now and then that have an interesting sort of aspect to them. For example, one of the things I was thinking of recently. So anybody's on the course, little advice for the character um, tool or tool, which means either spit or vomit. I was thinking about this one the other
Yeah.
day, and this one is actually because the only difference between the two pronunciations of this character is the tone. What you could imagine is that your TU actor, who's your TU actor?
Tony Stark.
Tony Stark. All right. So Tony Stark is in your bedroom, and regardless of the props for a moment, the beginning of it could be that he's like spitting in the bedroom, and then suddenly he realizes he needs the vomit, so he runs over to the bathroom because the bedroom's third tone and the bathroom's fourth tone. And because it's in the same location, it'll be the childhood home. It would be easy to do, in terms of how you might imagine it. So that was one I thought about. And so like things like that, if we see a character that it's like, oh, okay, this character has something special about it, we might throw a video in there as well. It's just constantly a balancing act between expanding the course, also, online business, figuring all that stuff out, because Luke and I are good at making curriculum, but it's like, oh yeah, how do we, what's online marketing? I don't understand. So there's all that too, which is a bit time consuming. So anyway, so great. So back on track here. So that's good to know. So have you found it to be getting, because one of the things I noticed about your scenes that you sent in is they're always, take this the right way. What I'm saying is like they almost seem perfect, right? I'm like, how did Ryan nailed this? But then you just said it takes 2 to 5 minutes for you to do a character, and I was like, why is it that it would take 2 to 5 minutes for you, but it takes Sydney, say, 30 seconds? And I think maybe it's because you want to make them too perfect. Am I getting anything, like, am I on point there a little bit?
So as I've been progressing more and more, I am finding more and more times where I don't worry about getting it perfect. I know that when it shows up in Anki, it will, help, which I've definitely seen several times. But to be honest, I'd say the 2 to 5 minutes is more trying to come up with a connection to the meaning. That is always my hardest part. Once I have a meaning concept, then actually like putting the story together, putting the props together and whatnot is it's a blink, basically. Like you just see the scene. But I have found that,
good.
But I've definitely found, like with some of my scenes, like from previous ones where I didn't focus quite as much on the meaning concept, to say, okay, I have all these components, I can see them, I can see where it's at, I can see who's doing something. What did that mean?
Right. Yeah. That is the biggest one. That is the biggest one. And it's one that's so hard to kind of help people understand, is that the keyword connection, if you find it, especially if you can relate to the thing that's specific to your own experiences, then the scene almost writes itself at that point, especially because all the props, they all have a use. So you can think about what would somebody be using a lamp for, or a knife for, or a bag for. It's like they have uses, so they tend to just sort of fit the scene. But the question is always, well, what do I associate with spit? Or well, spit's kind of easy, but like, there's some that are a bit more abstract. And coming up with those is sometimes a bit tricky. And so, so like that makes sense. So fair enough. And I think that the best thing you can do for that is kind of have questions that you ask yourself about the nature of the meaning of some sort. When it's an object, it's pretty easy, but if it's like something abstract, like how, right? Like this character means how. It's like, okay. So you have to ask questions like, all right, who might say how? In what situation would you say how? Like, and then when you go through that line of questioning, or any of these series of questions, you can tend to help troubleshoot that way. But first of all, 2 to 5 minutes is still way faster than rote learning. So, that it really, and you're only going to get better at it. I got, I did 3,000 characters this way. And towards the end, on the last day, I learned the last 100 characters in like a sitting. I just sat down and was like, I'm doing it. I'm getting to 3,000. I had that sort of like, I can see the finish line motivation, but I checked Donkey and I forgot a few of them because I went fast, but for the most part, I remember the vast majority of them. It's really amazing how you can sometimes have a very tenuous scene in your mind and they'll stay sometimes. And other times you're like, this scene was perfect. And then it doesn't stick. So, but you'll get better at all that stuff. So that's great. All right. So in your experience going through so that was a specific question about the characters. This question is a bit more open-ended about the course. So you don't have to necessarily narrow it down to 3, but we generally ask what are the 3 aspects of the course, 3 parts of the Mandarin Blueprint method that you think have made the biggest impact for you. But you don't have to have 3. If you just want to say 1 or 2 or whatever, that's fine. Or 7, that's fine too.
Yeah. So definitely the biggest one has just been a way to learn characters. So coming into this course, I knew a couple hundred characters. I studied Japanese at one point and learned like 1,000 characters for Japanese through rote memorization. It was terrible. I had forgotten almost all of them by the time I started learning Chinese.
Right.
And then I tried doing like a lot of extensive reading and rote memorization. I used Scritter for like a year to the point where my hands were hurting because I was,
Oh my God.
tracing
Yeah.
it so much on my phone. And it's just like you dropped it for a week and you forgot it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but with the memory palace stuff that you guys have set up and walked me through, it's a 2 months later. Okay, I've forgotten their character. Think for a second. Okay, now I remember the character. There's actually a way to
Yeah.
remember it.
I still remember so many of my scenes, from years ago now. And it's like that's how memory works. It's one of those things. It's so obvious. It's almost not obvious. It's like if you remember something like, oh, I went to the theme park with my parents when I was 5 and I rode a roller coaster and I still remember that. Well, why did you remember it? Because of the emotional impact of the situation. I'd never been on a roller coaster before and it scared me too much, or I loved it or something like that. Right. And you remember it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, if you know the mechanism for it, just make it up. Just be like, okay, imagine that I was in the front yard of my sister's house and suddenly a meteor was in the sky and it was about to hit the earth. Like, what are all the emotions that you would feel about that? And it's like, you're going to
Yeah.
remember that if you just set it up properly in your mind. And so and the key you're pointing out is that rote memorization gives you nothing to go back to if you forget. If you do forget in the Mandarin Blueprint method, you can go back to a meteor is falling out of the sky and about to kill us all. Like, that's a big difference in terms of how you're going to remember it, and so it's actually, and
Yeah.
have you found that to be more at least entertaining when you sit down to learn some new things?
Yeah. It's definitely a little more enjoyable than just practicing the character 100 times.
Yeah. I could never do that. I would just, yeah. If that was what
No,
was ahead of me, I would have been like, I'm going to learn something else. Yeah.
yeah, and that's what happened. It's like why I started 4 years ago and didn't make much progress is just because it wasn't fun, and I'm doing this because
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay. So apart from the characters, are there any other aspects that you found to be particularly useful?
So like the vocabulary and the grammar cards are definitely useful, but even if it was just the characters, I would have been pretty happy.
Hmm.
The other part's kind of sugar.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Um,
Sugar on top.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
sugar on top.
What about
But
the order of the characters?
so okay, so like a personal thing here. I'm a computer programmer and do computational linguistics and whatnot. So I wrote a computer program a while ago when I was starting to learn Chinese, which took Chinese text and added pinyin to it.
Oh, okay.
So it would process it, and it would actually do it like if you had a sentence like "我只有一只狗,"
Mm,
just have one dog. You have the jur character in there twice with different pronunciations, and it actually understands that and puts the right pinyin in for the situation.
nice.
So I read the entire first book of Harry Potter that way. So it's like I didn't actually know any characters, but you slowly start to pick some of them up just by frequency.
Sure.
Well, I modified the program recently after I started doing Mandarin Blueprint. Tried reading something and just put it so if this character shows up at the level I'm at in Mandarin Blueprint. So that level 14 when I did this, all the characters and words that aren't in the Mandarin Blueprint method up to level 14,
Yeah.
don't put the pin in that. And it's amazing how much of the text I'm actually reading on my own that way.
Hmm.
So the frequency order that you guys are doing and the way they build up, yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's like so many things you have to consider. Luke and I were, I remember we were constantly going back and forth because you have to think about the character and what's under it. So the components and the
Mm-hmm.
pronunciations, but then you also have to consider how many words get unlocked, but are there any, you have to add your human intuition to it too, because pure frequency lists, they don't necessarily take into account certain things that are either newer developments in the language or just things that may not be like, for example, you have a word that the word itself
Mm-hmm.
is quite frequent, but the two characters in it aren't that frequent because it's like that's the only word they're used in. And it's like, so
Yeah.
do you say, well, character frequency wise, this isn't that high frequency, but the word is high frequency. So there's a lot of considerations, and I'm sure that
Yeah.
if we spent even more time on it, it would get a few percent better. But like that's at some point you have to go, okay, well, it's close enough that by the time you finish the first 5 phases, you've got that 80% by frequency. So, maybe there's a few things, like I've looked at a couple things in it and I go, if I could do this again, I probably would put this here and not there. But it's like the difference of like, okay, this is character 200. Maybe I would have put it at character 130 or something like that. It's not a huge deal, but that's good.
I honestly think you guys might be overthinking this a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure we have.
Or like, at level 15, you can read 30%, and then at level 20, you could read 35 or 40% or whatever. Like, you just like block it out like that and just say, okay, order within that. Yeah, it's pretty flexible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we it's always just a matter of, we want to make sure that people keep going, because we know there's a thing with learning Mandarin, or really almost anything, but it really feels very strongly like this with Mandarin, because some learning endeavors, they have a very quick initial stage. So like there's sort of like Japanese, because the pronunciation is not so hard, people can sometimes get some basic Japanese really quickly. And so, you'd say, oh, well, this is great. And they get motivated and they keep going. And then they hit the really hard parts, because the grammar is quite confusing. And it's, the way that they mix the three different types of, they have the hiragana and the katakana and the kanji, and the way they mix them, and then the kanji has three different pronunciations, and it gets confusing, right? But it doesn't necessarily seem all that confusing at the beginning. Chinese is kind of the opposite. You have to do all this legwork at the beginning, right? And so it doesn't feel like your progress is going all that quickly. But once you reach that critical mass, the progress you have is really fast. And we always want people to get to that, because if you get to that, you'll start to have that, success breeding success and motivation. So, whenever we're thinking about things like, now, 30%, we're always just thinking like, whatever it takes to keep you going, because eventually you'll reach the point where nothing will stop you. Like, you'll just be like, oh, I'm going to go. Sydney said that in the last case study. He's like, oh, I'm definitely going to go to the end now. It's like, good, you got to that point, and it doesn't mean you're fluent at that point. It just means you're ready. You're like, the motivation is now self-sustaining. Yeah. So,
I'm already seeing at this point, like if I see a new Chinese character and something I'm trying to read, I might just like, okay, I've never seen this one. Okay, break it down. Okay, there's my megaphone on the left. There's, the human snake tongue on the right, or whatever it is. Yeah, it's actually just coming instinctual to start trying to break down the characters into components.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's exactly what you want. And eventually, when you're reading all the time, and so we'll be continuing to get lots more comprehensible input coming out as we continue to expand. So okay, cool. So basically, we got the characters, the character order, and from your perspective, it's like the vocabulary and the grammar is kind of sugar on top, which is, hey, if that's how you feel about it, that's great, because there's a part of me that always wants to be like, look, just learn the characters first, because there's some kind of, it's obviously everybody's different. So I never want to be like, do that. But if you just did the 600 characters, like, and then you went back through and did the vocabulary and grammar and you just sort of compartmentalize them in your brain, that would be perfectly fine. Like, it's not that that's the wrong way to go about it. That's how I would kind of go about it, because I'm that type of thinker. I like to.
I hadn't thought about doing that.
Yeah. But, well, sure. You can, like, absolutely. We don't.
I might try that. So one of those things where, like, when I know this is a question you're going to ask, and then I'm going to talk about it now.
Yeah, sure.
When I first saw the Mandarin Blueprint method, I just kind of got lucky. It's that I was giving up. I had given up on learning through Scritter just by nothing against Scritter. It's just a rote memorization thing. It's like, this isn't working. I've been trying for years and it's not working. Okay, I've heard about these mnemonic memory palaces things, and I know when I was studying Japanese, remembering the kanji was something that a lot of people talked about. Katsumoto talked about it on All Japanese all the time, several times, things like that. And I looked at it at one point, but never really taken it seriously. But like, I know they have a Chinese version. They're remembering the Hansa, though. I will say about this one, by the way, if you look at both books, the remembering the Hansa is like weird word order, doesn't talk about pronunciation. Remembering the kanji, which was the original one, does. So it's much better for the Japanese book than it is for the Chinese book.
Yeah.
But whatever, the pronunciation system, like you said, in Japanese for the kanji is completely different, because you might have like 7 different pronunciations for the same character. You get into a slightly different scenario. But yeah, so it's like I was like, okay, I'm going to go by remembering the Hansa. I'm going to work through it. And it's like, okay, the reviews aren't necessarily great compared to remembering the kanji, which I had issues with. Let's look to see what else is out there. You guys had released your course, I think, 2 days before
Oh
I
wow.
had this search. So it was like really lucky for me.
Yeah.
Uh, so
Yeah, the
like,
Chinese would say that's very 巧. The word for that is 巧. 真巧. It's like coincidental. Great. 真巧. Happy
sometimes
coincidence.
things just work out.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. That's great. So 2 days
So
after we released it, so did you like do a search for it, or how did you just?
I think I literally did a Google search for Chinese mnemonic character methods or something like
Yes.
that. And
Search engine optimization worked for one thing. The first time.
I mean,
Oh,
exactly what it delivered.
well, I mean, I remember I made a few blog posts. I was like, maybe somebody out there is searching for Chinese mnemonics. I guess I'll make that the keyword. That stuff,
Well, it worked.
optimizations, like just made my brain explode the first time I learned about it. I was like, oh
Oh,
no.
I hate it.
Yeah,
I
I
do
know.
that part of my job is working with that stuff, and
You have to
it's
do it, but I just like I always feel like
terrible.
my soul slightly slips away each time. But yeah, hey, it worked for that one. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
Exactly. So yeah. When I saw that, and I'm looking, I'm like, this sounds more fun and maybe uh, more. What's the word I'm looking for? More systematic, more well thought out for all the different parts of learning a character. The meaning, the pronunciation, and how to write it. So I was like, I'll give it a try. Um, I'm glad I did.
Yeah, yeah, great, great. That's fantastic. So now, did you? So like thus far, where are you in the character order right now?
I think I'm at like character 200 and something.
Great, great, awesome. So thus far, so you've already said that it helped you recognize, enough. You're sort of looking at the Harry Potter book and seeing how many, if you get the. I know the types of software you're talking about, where it's like it shows you the stuff you've already learned, and they don't
Yeah.
have the opinion for those. So you're saying that's already been a factor. Have you been able to communicate with your daughter's teachers any better?
Um, that definitely has gotten better, but I don't know if that's due to the blueprint course or just through exposure.
Yeah, sure.
And looking things up, like, my daughter came home the other day and she's saying something along the lines of shisha, shisha, shisha. And my wife and I can't figure out what it is.
Oh,
And
right.
finally, like, I'm trying to figure out actually what's going on and look up what is to wash hands in Chinese? Shisha.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, that's what she was saying. She's asking to wash her hands.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah. And so things like, da da da. It's like,
yeah, yeah.
well, okay, so trying to learn Chinese through a toddler's pronunciation has been weird, but I've learned a lot more through that one. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, well, I feel like if you have a toddler who's figuring it out, that should remind you that it's okay to speak kind of not perfectly in the beginning because
yeah,
it's just how it is. It's like when I was 2 years in, I passed the HSK 6 after being 2 years in, but my pronunciation still probably sounded like a toddler in a lot of ways because I was still in some way. Well, first of all, as part of our story, I didn't focus enough on pronunciation in the beginning, so I had built up some bad habits. But a lot of times
yeah,
kids do too. That's like they'll say things terribly. You'll be like, "What? That's I didn't that's not a word. What are you talking about?" But they just have to like. But the best part about them is that they're not self conscious. They're just like, "Oh, whatever. I said it with
yeah.
the wrong tone. Who cares?" Like that's
Which makes it like nice speaking with the teachers a little bit. Is one, they're used to listening to toddlers speak, and two, they're just amazed that a white guy is speaking Chinese to them at all.
yeah.
So I don't feel very self conscious talking to them because it's like the expectations are very low right now.
Yeah, yeah. Best advantage. I'm in Florida right now because my sister just got married and I'm visiting her for a bit. And I went to a sushi restaurant that happened to have a Chinese waitress. So my sister was like, "You should talk to her in Chinese." I was like, "We're in a sushi restaurant. I'm pretty sure this is Japanese." But she was like, "No, no, she's Chinese." So and I was chatting with her for a bit, and it's like they have no expectation that anybody's going to try to learn their language because it's not just that they know that English is the lingua franca. It's that they are like and Japanese people believe this too about Japanese is that they're like, well, this is a really hard language. We don't expect you to learn it because it's really hard. So, and so
Yeah,
when you do, they're like, oh, great, thanks. It's almost like they're grateful that I remember this one girlfriend that I had a few years back. She saw me when I was really studying. She looked at me and she said, "Oh, it's so like moving that you're putting so much time into this," And I was like, "Oh, cool. I'm glad you feel that way. And so it's really, if they're grateful and impressed, it means that you're like, oh, I'll say something. Whereas in America, I feel like if you are learning English, it must be harder because people are a little bit less forgiving if you don't speak English well. So,
They just expect it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun, like, studying a lot of languages to see the different reactions people have to it.
Yeah.
So it's like when I speak Spanish in the Bay Area here, it's either they just completely like, it's just, okay, this is normal, somebody speaking Spanish with me, or it's no, why are you speaking Spanish to me? I'm just going to speak English. But it's just one of those two reactions.
Right.
Versus like Chinese, they're just amazed that you are attempting to speak Chinese and are very, very happy about it.
Yeah. There are levels to it, though, that you'll get to see, which as you continue to improve, which is, you can tell the difference between somebody who's just like, oh, good, you're trying, versus somebody who's like, oh, whoa, you can really speak. And you can just tell the difference. Like for what the girl the other day said at the sushi place, she was, she turned to my sister and she was like, he's speaking it perfectly, and she was like, that's cool. And I was like, yeah, I feel proud, so it's always, there's the levels to it. So that's always good.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see here. So a question is very important to us because we offer a product that is weird. It's not like we're basically saying, throw out everything you think about what language learning is supposed to be and completely reframe how this process is going to go. So I've never met anybody who wasn't skeptical at the beginning. Now, you, of course, had a precondition of understanding about mnemonics a bit, and you were even familiar with Heisig, and of course, Heisig is kind of the foundation of the Mandarin Blueprint method, so maybe you weren't too skeptical, but if you had skepticism, like where was it, and what did you think, when in the beginning, and then eventually did it go away?
Yeah. So my skepticism on it, it sounds, looking at it conceptually, is you've checked all the boxes on what I know I need to learn to study or to learn a character, basically. And that characters form words. So if you understand the morpheme of the character and you throw the morphemes together, you create words, and that kind of makes sense. Which is something I was lacking. That's why I really wanted to learn the characters, was to get the morphemes to understand the compound words, things like that. But you checked all the boxes. But the part that I was skeptical on is I've looked at mnemonics before. I have never successfully used them. All my language study is it's never really, I've tried it once or twice, it never stuck, I never completely understood it. It always seemed like one of those things where you're learning something more complex than what you're trying to learn in order to learn it.
Yeah.
But I know I've gotten pretty far with learning vocabulary via, extensive reading and things like that, so that it was never completely necessary. But with characters, it's I tried for years and nothing was working. Okay, I'm just going to try anything at this point, and this thing checks all the boxes, so we'll give it a shot.
Right.
I struggled a lot the first 10 characters, by the way, maybe the first 15 characters, which is when I started to actually be able to get it and do it, just because I never had really done much with mental visualization. So even my wife is not one of my characters in the method, but even just trying to mentally visualize her at that point, it's well, I have a feeling for what she looks like, but I couldn't actually describe it or draw it or mentally draw it. This kind of goes to the point, I'm not great with visual memory to begin with. My wife was making fun of me at one point because I didn't remember that my boss had glasses. It's I don't know if he wears glasses or not. I see him every day, but I was So that was developing that skill was the part that was a huge problem to me. It was am I going to get over this? Is this actually going to be possible for me to do? Or am I just one of those people who's broken in that regard?
Oh, yeah.
Turns out I'm not. Turns out it's good. And turns out it's actually just made it so I can visualize things a lot easier than I ever could before. And mnemonics work, apparently.
Yeah, well, that was something that I also was super skeptical of at the beginning of, because I learned about mnemonics in 4th grade or something. My teacher explained what it was, and it just, because it was taught in such a shallow way at the time, it was just sort of some basic stuff. And, it is effective, but I was kind of this is a weird word. And, what with mnemonic, that sounds weird. So I can't even spell it. And, it was just sort of this, I just sort of thought it was this weird thing that our teachers taught us. And I actually don't really like the word because I think it turns people off. I want to just be your imagination, just imagine you'll remember things you imagine more easily. But I got to say, I really appreciate you saying how much of a struggle it was for you, and that your natural visual memory isn't very good, because like, look, that's the type of person, if you can do it, then it's like the person who's, maybe a little bit better at visual memory, they'll be certain they could do it. But then somebody who's also like, I don't know, my visual memory's not good. Well, like, listen to Ryan. You were able to pull it off, because I think everybody can do it, because it's deeper than like even personality. Like dogs can visualize. It's like I imagine it sure seems like that when they're sleeping and they're like, it looks like they're in a dream. So it's like, clearly, if animals can visualize, then this is deeper than even personality. Like some people will say like, oh, I just don't know if this type of learning works for my personality. And I'm like, kind of like, well, I mean, there is a condition called aphantasia that some very small percentage of people have, where they can't visualize at all. Yeah, it's very rare. So basically, if you're not of that genetic condition, you should be able to visualize things. And if you can visualize things, then you just have to systemize it. I remember one of the things that blew my mind was how well my brain remembers something. If I just go, okay, the two props in the scene are an apple and a dog, right? And I forgot the apple, and then I go back in the scene. It's like, just make the apple glowing. And like my brain, like, I don't know whether it's that my brain is smart that it can do this, or it's dumb that it just so easily goes, oh, now I remember it forever because it's shiny. It's amazing how simple this stuff is. So yeah, that's great to hear that you considered yourself to be a person who is not good with visual memory, and you're still able to kind of get over that hump. That was me with languages in general. I was like, I'm bad at languages. I can't learn languages, so.
I'm terrible at learning languages. I just enjoy it. But then that works out anyways.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So you already mentioned that you thought, okay, a recommendation for the course might be to, instead of just having all the videos in the first 105, maybe occasionally take some out and then maybe add a few more later. We're already working on the second part of that. But do you have any other recommendations for how we can improve the course? Sort of criticisms or areas that we can improve?
So a lot of mine are going to be overly technical because I am a programmer and I'm looking at it from that perspective.
That's fine. We'd be happy to hear this.
So like a couple things is sometimes the formatting can be a little wonky in the text of the messages in the video courses. And it really looks like you guys aren't using a systemized fashion of saying like, you can do an HTML class or, tag that says, this is the header of an example sentence. And then just apply CSS so that always looks consistent, even if you change it in the future.
Been driving us crazy. Yeah. It's I want to show you. Maybe I'll show you when we're off the air the type of like the back end text editor, because it drives us nuts. It doesn't do. There's just so many issues with it, and it drives us crazy. Because like Luke's more on the design side of things, but so many of the times I'll be like, why is it showing up like this? I don't know, because I don't know anything about coding. But yeah, anyway, go on. So yeah, the formatting, I agree.
And obviously, you know that the method of the Anki stuff right now is kind of a mess.
Yeah.
In terms of choosing cards, which, by the way, a suggestion of that. So you know how Anki allows you to do plugins, and writing your own SRS program would be probably outside of the financial or time worthiness things on your end. But you could consider having somebody write a plugin, which you just plug in, okay, I'm at level 15, and it unsuspends all the cards from level 15 based off the text for the users.
Oh, yeah? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because you guys have the tags in there that say what level it at, so that would be a pretty easy thing to write.
All right. Yeah. That's actually, that could be something as a short-term fix. Like we really, part of me wants to just, find a way, maybe we can find someone who's willing to invest a little money so that we can get the SRS component off of Anki. And it's like, I love Anki actually. I have like a great deal of, I've learned so much.
Over a decade before your course. So it's like, I'm very familiar with Anki. I've contributed to the Anki Android, the Anki Droid project before. As a programmer, I've helped with like the Chinese extension plugin before. It's like, I'm incredibly familiar with Anki, and this works for me. I don't mind it, but I'm also familiar with the fact that that is messy.
Yeah, well, it's too
Um,
many things. Like for Mandarin Blueprint, we don't need 90% of the functionality. So it's like
yeah,
it gets, they all the functionality they packed in there, so much of it is irrelevant to what we're doing. And so it's like it just confuses people. And of course, it's not exactly a good looking application, which for people who are non-tech savvy, that can be a big turnoff right away. It's like you look at something like Memrise and it's fundamentally the same thing. It's just an SRS, but like Memrise is pretty. And it's like, it's a Duolingo similar. It's like, oh, this is fun
yeah,
to do. And I mean, we tried to make our cards look nice, but like, it's still, at the end of the day, it's not that, you know,
yeah.
functional in application. So yeah, that's of course, yeah, we definitely know that's one of those things. We have the wireframes for the Mandarin Blueprint app like created. It's just that because the system is actually, it's quite complex, and what we want it to be able to do is complex. It's too expensive for us to make at the moment. So well, we'll just keep hopefully getting more subscribers, and then eventually we'll be able to afford it. But yeah, so that will solve that one. Any other recommendations? So we have if we can move
Yeah.
to something other than Anki, doing better formatting, and of course the video recommendation. Anything else?
Um, that I can think of.
Great,
Because I
great.
really enjoyed the course.
Awesome. Yeah, well, that's great feedback. I mean, we that's stuff that we definitely want to work on. So, final question for you: just would you recommend the Mandarin Blueprint method to people?
I already have.
Yeah. Oh, great.
So,
Perfect. Cool. Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for all the contributions. Seriously, you and Chad and Sydney and a few others, and occasionally we get somebody who comes into the course, and I just know right away.
yeah,
I'm like, oh, this person's really engaged. We just had somebody recently who was. You can always tell because they start leaving comments a lot,
yeah,
and we're like, okay, great, yeah, this is awesome. So everybody out there, be like Ryan, and that's what I'll do. We made a coupon code "Be Like Chad" before. I'll make a new one, "Be Like Ryan," that will give you 30% off your subscription to the Mandarin Blueprint method. And Ryan, would you be willing to check in with us in maybe a couple months from now, and we can check your progress and see how you're doing?
yeah.
Sure.
I
Okay,
would
cool.
be
So,
happy to do that.
awesome.
And also a comment before we sign off here, just me giving advice to the other people listening to this. So I early on in the course started writing out some of my scenes for you guys to look at. Like, I still do that on occasion, depending on how fun I think the scene is or how clever it was. But to begin with, it wasn't that. It wasn't even that necessarily that I wanted the feedback from you guys. It's writing it out on occasion, not for everyone, but writing out a few of them really helped formulate my thoughts.
Sure.
And really helped too. Because, as I said, like I don't have the great visual. I have a much better visual memory now, by the way. That has greatly improved that cognitive aspect. But at the beginning, it was terrible. So forcing myself to actually like write it out like a story helped my ability to see it.
Right.
So I would highly recommend that, even if people don't want to post it, and don't do it on every character, like you guys have said many times, but occasionally, especially at the beginning, write it out. Label exactly, these are the parts, these are why these are here, and then look at, did I include anything else in that scene? Did that need to be there? No, not really.
Yeah, it's great. It's a very good thing to do in the early days, and I would definitely recommend doing that because I mean, writing helps you organize your thoughts always. Regardless of what kind of writing it
Yeah,
is. But just remember that like sometimes people think that this is a requirement. It is like it's the opposite of a requirement. It is a helpful tool, but you definitely if you had to do that for 3,000 characters, oh my gosh, like that would take
that'd be
forever. And so,
terrible.
especially because characters they come to you in less time it would take to type them out. So it's like,
Which is definitely the case now.
yeah.
So
But in the beginning, yeah, totally. It's a very good technique, just as long as you're well aware that you can drop the habit later, or just only do it when you're, and I mean, still, you could, if you have it as a kind of tool, then you can use it when
yeah.
you're like, I'm struggling with this scene, so let me try to write it out. Absolutely. And cool. That's awesome. All right. Well, as I say, I will make a new coupon called Be Like Ryan. And that will be, you can apply that to 30% off the Mandarin Blueprint method. And as always, we have all this stuff on our website. We've got ebooks, we've got our blog, we've got our podcast, and we're coming out with new stuff all the time. So check that out at mandarinblueprint.com. And Ryan, thank you again for all of your feedback and help. And we'll sign off there. Thanks again, Ryan.
All right, thank you.